So please be silent. Welcome to the 5th IFPMA media briefing on COVID-19. My name is Claire Dool. We're going to be looking forward to next year, but also giving you a status update on what has been achieved in terms of diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. Journalists, please start submitting your questions now. That's 2:30 Central European Time, 8:30 Eastern Time, and do include your name and your outlet. We're going to be taking as many of those questions as possible in the second part of this briefing. First of all, our speakers are going to set the scene, and we have a truly global lineup from the innovative biopharmaceutical industry. Let me introduce you to them. We have Dave Ricks, Chairman and CEO of Eli Lilly Group and President of IFPMA. We have Dr. Paul Stoffels, Chief Scientific Officer of Johnson & Johnson. We have Dr. Albert Bourla, Chairman and CEO of Pfizer, and Dr. Severin Schwan, CEO of the Roche Group and Vice President of IFPMA. And we're also joined by Rasmus Beck-Hansen, who's the co-founder and creator of Airfinity, which is a science analytics company whose data is used by the pharmaceutical sector, governments, and the media. But first of all, let me turn to the Director General of the IFPMA, Thomas Cueni. The IFPMA, as you know, is the body that represents the industry at the WHO and at the UN more generally. So Thomas, to turn to you first, if you can tell us how you think the industry has engaged during the pandemic and what are the key issues at the global and institutional level?
Thank you very much, Claire. And I think it's time to look back over the last 10 months and look forward to where we stand on tackling COVID-19. I think it's fair to say that the biopharmaceutical industry is really walking the talk. From the outset of the pandemic, we said we feel a deep sense of responsibility because of the huge health impact, to impact on lives and lost lives, but also the huge impact on the global economy. And we also said we feel a deep sense of responsibility because one can only do this in partnership with governments, with philanthropic organizations, international organizations, academia, biotech, and within the industry. And I think when you look at this tremendous challenge, we have come a long way. We have, within a matter of 10 months, seen developments of huge number of tests, treatments, and vaccines. And we have also seen what we said early on. At the end of the day, notwithstanding the many, many thousands of academics, companies, and others involved, you really rely on a relatively small number of big, innovative pharma companies with the ability to develop and scale up the tests, treatments, and vaccines. When you look at the daunting challenge, just from the perspective of vaccines, the largest number of vaccine ever produced was 450 million doses for polio. Here we talk about not tripling the polio vaccination, we talk about tripling the vaccines output on a global level, billions, more than 10 billions of doses, hopefully. We have actually seen that this can be done without cutting corners. I think that's truly important and was only possible because of a unique partnership of everyone involved. That's why it's also important we have early on committed to providing the tools to tackling COVID-19 in a fair, equitable, accessible, and affordable manner. That's why IFPMA was an early founding partner of Act Accelerator. That's why it's now important that we make sure that we also live up to the promise, no one is safe until everyone is safe. Now, at the same time, we have had great, fantastic results, as I've heard Jeremy Farrar say just recently on desert island discs, fantastic results of the clinical trials of the early vaccines. Having seen that, and I think one exceeded expectation, we also need to be realistic. There will be bumps ahead of the road. We may see challenges in terms of really fulfilling the manufacturing capacity, the deployment of the vaccines to the people who are all waiting for them, and we will need continued partnership in this. We also will continue to commit to address and do whatever is needed. I've never heard so many people say 24/7. I think that's still why we long for a little bit of the end of the year recess. We need vaccines, but we will also continue to need treatments, and we continue to need tests. That's why we have assembled here CEOs from the companies who can talk about the vaccines, the treatments, as well as the tests. We must also, at the same time, respect people's concerns about, for example, the safety of vaccines. We must listen to people, we must involve them and create trust, and we must do this together. But end of the year, I think I really see a lot of light at the tunnel, and I look forward to a very interesting briefing. And back to you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Well, let me introduce Rasmus Bach-Henderson, who is the CEO and co-founder of Airfinity, who is going to give us some insights into the latest data on vaccines, treatments, and diagnostics, all of which are, of course, extremely important during this pandemic. So, Rasmus, over to you.
Thank you so much. Are we bringing the slides up? So we'll provide a brief snapshot of the state of the test, the treatments, and the vaccines, and just waiting for the slides to be shown.
We can certainly see them here.
Okay,
Rasmus.
Okay, so we go to the next slide. If we start with testing, then there's no doubt that the world has seen a massive increase globally in the amount of testing being carried out. We see a wide difference in how many tests are carried out in various countries. We have countries like Israel, UK, Sweden, who are testing more than 0.4% of their population. US, Switzerland, Canada, and others have also increased significantly. But then there are still large parts of the world where testing isn't carried out at a wide scale. The countries that are carrying out testing have no doubt really benefited from that and has found a way to deal better with the pandemic, and it has reduced hospitalizations. Next slide, please. So if we look at the treatment area, treatment is probably the area where we've seen the most direct impact so far. The amount of treatments being investigated is really astonishing. We're seeing more than 1,000 different treatments worldwide currently under investigation in clinical trials. And this touches areas both of prevention, moderate and severe diseases. We have slightly less in rehabilitation, but overall, I would say the scientific efforts are across the cycle and very impressive. We also have a number, almost more than 2,000 clinical trials carried out at the moment. Next slide, please. And some of those have already proven to be significantly better than that current standard of care. And it's across various treatment types: antiviral, steroids, various antibodies have proven to be effective. And I think the decrease we're seeing in global mortality and the fatality rate is largely thanks to the significant progress we've seen in treatments. That being said, I think it's also fair to say that we still don't have the silver bullet. So treatment on its own can kind of reduce the impact, but it won't take us out of the pandemic. And that's the reason why there's so much focus on vaccines. Next slide, please. If we look at the global vaccine map, then we have more than 300 vaccines currently being tested, and across a whole range of areas. We have, if you look at it from a global portfolio perspective, I think a quite good diversity of vaccine candidates. We've also seen governments committing almost to buying 11 billion doses of vaccines. And we've also seen people throughout the world really participating in these trials. So if you look at the phase 3 trials, we have an average participation of 15,000 people, which is quite astonishing. Next slide, please. What's then going to happen in the next quarter? That's of course the question that many ask, and we've seen the fantastic results from Pfizer and BioNTech, Moderna, and AstraZeneca, and now waiting for the other candidates that are in phase 3. We expect Johnson & Johnson's large trial to, based on our forecast models, I'm sure we can know more later on today, but to reach their endpoint early February. AstraZeneca slightly later in February, Novavax also slightly later in February. And then we have the non-Western candidates, Sputnik, Sinovac, CanSino, and Sinopharm. We would expect them to meet their endpoints already sometime in January. But that really means that in Q1 this year, we'll have a lot more data to go by. Next slide, please. So, and on top of that, we then have a next batch of vaccines coming out, just starting the clinical phase 3 trials. So we would expect those to have results sometime in the summer. So Sanofi, GSK, CureVac, Merck are some of the candidates really to watch out for. And that means that by the summer and Q3, we really hopefully will have a big global portfolio of available vaccines. Next slide, please. The challenge will then be, is production, because as Thomas also pointed out, this is an unprecedented, almost like wartime scale production needed in this area. We're seeing that companies are diversifying where they're producing this throughout the world to reduce the risk. US looks to be the largest producer, followed by India, China, and then a number of the European countries that are known to have large scale production. Next slide, please. The question then is, when will this bring world back to a new normal, or when will countries reach herd immunity? And that's of course a big question for us all. Based on our forecast, we see a wide discrepancy between the various countries, and I think that's going to be one of the key concerns going forward. So US looks to be the first one to reach herd immunity, followed by Canada, UK, and then the European Union after that. And that's already in Q2 and Q3. The rest of the world there's more uncertainty around the rest of the world. It really depends on the results of the upcoming trials and the availability of large-scale production facilities. But I think when we look into end of next year, we will be very far in having immunized large part of the global population. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Rasmus, for those insights. Well, I'm going to ask our speakers for a status update, and let me begin with Eli Lilly and Company and Dave Ricks. So Dave, what areas have you been looking at, and which ones are the most promising?
Thank you for being with us today. And I think we are at an important moment in the fight against COVID-19. From our side, we focused on therapies from the beginning, both repurposed medicines that were useful for other things as well to test against COVID-19, as well as purpose-built medicines to arrest COVID-19. I'm pleased to say we recently, in the last 4 weeks, received an emergency use authorization for both of those strategies. For repurposed medicines, we tested a medicine called baricitinib or Olumiant. It's an anti-inflammatory that is proven to be useful on top of an antiviral remdesivir in patients who are more advanced in hospital. This is now continued to be tested in multiple other phase 3 studies on top of steroids, for instance, in competition with steroids to see which is better at this modality. And patients are being treated, thousands of patients being treated as we speak with baricitinib, particularly here in the US where the EUA was achieved. Additionally, we collaborated with many actors, including biotech companies and academic medicine, the NIH, starting back on March 12th, actually, to develop the first ever approved medicine that was designed just to defeat COVID. This is a monoclonal antibody. Bamlanivimab is the name. It was approved by both Canada and the US under emergency use very recently, and is also being studied in combination with another antibody. The idea here is when you have high risk factors and are new in a diagnosis, we can treat people with what's called passive immunization to reduce the burden of symptoms and allow them to more successfully escape the effects of the virus. In our studies, hospitalization rates were reduced by more than 70% when this antibody was used. The challenge with these antibodies is they are hard to make. We've partnered with Amgen, with Samsung, with our own networks and others to make more product available. So far, we've shipped over 250,000 doses. Hundreds of thousands have been used already. And we anticipate by the end of the year shipping 1 million. Right now, that's to Canada and the US where it's been approved. We also have under review our combination therapy of 2 antibodies and additional studies looking at prophylaxis and other settings where this could be useful. Final point on the monoclonals is we also have a partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to produce the antibody as well as make it available at marginal cost, or in some cases even supported by philanthropic donations to low and middle income countries. A very important part of this initiative, as was just shown by the data we saw, it's likely that the period where treatments like bamlanivimab will be important will be longer in lower developed countries than in the most developed countries because of the vaccine availability. So we're working hard to extend the reach of this medicine as well. Finally, just to say, I'm stepping out of the IFPMA president role, but I'm super proud of this industry. Lilly's story, which I just told, is common across the sector. Companies rallied quickly. We put our scientific prowess to work in record speed and collaborated like never before. And I think it's because of that we exit 2020 with a new hope to overcome this virus in the coming months through vaccination, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a second, as well as with better treatments. And all of that inside of one calendar year, really a phenomenal and unprecedented mobilization of this industry.
Dave, thank you very much for updating us on what your company is doing in treatments. And as you say, we end the year with new hope. And if I could bring in Severin to the conversation, because of course, vaccines are getting approval, they're being rolled out, but diagnostics are important. And can you tell us the role that you see for diagnostics going forward?
Right. Yeah, I'm quite impressed about the progress which has been made on the medical front with new medicines, now the vaccines. But the reality is that we still have to live for some time with this pandemic, and diagnostic tests will even be very important beyond that. So as you have just seen, it's very likely that vaccines will only be broadly available later next year. So I expect the demand for diagnostic testing to still outstrip supply for a number of months, and even beyond then. Diagnostic testing will be very important, as we will unlikely be in a situation that we can eradicate the virus. What I should also say is that we need tests where we can differentiate for other diseases which have similar symptoms, influenza in particular. So we have also developed a test which can differentiate between COVID and influenza. So that will be important beyond the pandemic. And finally, it's also important to track the efficacy of vaccines over time. We still have little information about the duration and the efficacy of vaccines. And for that, you also need tests, so-called antibody tests. So diagnostics will remain very important, not only for the months to come, but probably for the years to come.
And Severin, you've also just done a partnership with Regeneron. Could you quickly tell us about what that partnership consists of in terms of treatments and what each are bringing to the table?
Right. So this is a combination of antibodies, a so-called antibody cocktail, something Dave has just referred to, as Lilly is also working on these type of therapies. So we got together with our partner Regeneron emergency use approval recently. And it's a very nice example of how the industry is working together. So one of the key constraints here is manufacturing capacities. And at Roche, we have large monoclonal antibody manufacturing capacities. And that was the reason why we started to work together with Regeneron. The tech transfer is fully underway, and we hope to contribute to manufacturing capacities for these important type of medicines as we go forward.
Thank you very much indeed. Diagnostics are going to play a key role going forward, even though at the moment, of course, there's a lot of focus on vaccines. So let me bring in Dr. Albert Bourla of Pfizer. And of course, your vaccine with BioNTech has got regulatory approval in Bahrain, the UK. Today, the first people have been given that vaccine in the UK. Could you quickly tell us what do you think has been the ingredient for the pace, really, of the success in getting this vaccine to people?
Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a great honor to be together with these esteemed colleagues. If I look back from March to today, I think a lot of lessons have been learned, but the one that stands out is the power of science. And that applies to the entire spectrum of COVID. And that applies also to us. I think without our science, we wouldn't be able to do anything in that short period of time. That's clearly one. The second lesson I think that comes out, it is also the power of the private sector and what science in the hands of the private sector can do. We saw from very early days coming with the diagnostics, then with remdesivir, which was the first one, then Lilly came with the first purpose for that. And the infectious were coming, and many others came with diagnostics, Roche. We are coming first with the vaccine, and then pretty soon Moderna is following together with BioNTech ourselves. So all of that demonstrates that there is really something powerful and valuable for society in this private sector. But of course, that alone, they are necessary conditions, but not sufficient. We needed much more than that. And I think if you ask me to describe it with words, I would say courage. People needed to think very big to be able to do something like that. They needed to think very much out of the box. If we were doing things the way that we are always doing them, we would never be able to develop safe and effective solutions. Dedication. If the scientists, the engineers, the workers, the lab workers, the manufacturing workers, everyone, the executives, wouldn't stay up day and night for this literally 9 months. Again, I don't think it would be possible to do it. This dedication is enormous. I believe the fact that so many volunteers raised their hands to participate in the trial is amazing. That demonstrates that in the middle of crisis, sometimes crisis brings the best out of people. People that just raise their hands to become the people that on them we will test and untested technology at that time. And I believe that these were the ingredients that helped us. And unfortunately, this was a severe disease, and everything was coming very fast because we had a lot of COVID cases, so we could test very fast our products.
And it has lifted everybody, as Dave alluded to, and Thomas too. And Thomas was saying, of course, there is some sort of hesitancy, and people have got to be reassured because it has been unprecedented, the speed of development. And some people are concerned that that may have come as at the expense of safety and efficacy. What do you say to that, Albert?
I understand the concerns, and I believe that always there are some people that are skeptic about vaccines, but I have to say they are wrong, because vaccines has been proven over the century that they are the best medical intervention ever discovered. I can imagine that in this case, because the products, the vaccines or the medicines are developed very fast, but even worse, because have been severely politicized, particularly in the US, that makes people confused, and they don't know who to believe and what to believe, because the discussion was happening on political rather than on scientific terms. What I tell them it is that we didn't cut any corners, that we tested this vaccine with the exact same way that we are testing any vaccine that is circulating out there. That this vaccine actually was tested even because of the scrutiny with even higher standards in terms of how we do things. We have been extremely transparent, the entire industry, by putting out data as they were generated. The regulators are very careful, and they are calling external advisor committees so that they complement their expertise internally with the external expertise. So all of that, and by the way, the results are not at the edge. The results are phenomenal. So what I would say to them is I understand their concerns, but they need to think it twice, because the decision to vaccinate or not is not affecting only your health, it's affecting the health of others, and likely people that you love and you meet frequently with them. Because if you do not vaccinate, you are becoming the weak link that will allow the virus to replicate to those likely closer in your environment.
Thank you very much, Albert. Let me bring in Paul Stoffels into the conversation, because as we heard from Rasmus, Johnson & Johnson is also developing a vaccine. Indeed, there are many vaccine candidates in development. Paul, what can you update us on in terms of your clinical trials, the time frame, and where you are holding them?
Yeah, we are in. Thank you first for inviting me, and thanks for the question. We are in the middle of phase 3, and even towards the end, we are running a study, a phase 3 study, up to 60,000 people. The final number will be determined by the incidence of the disease, and as it is very high, we might have results sooner than expected. But we target for results in the month of January, both for safety and efficacy. We have already starting certain submissions in Europe on a rolling base, so to accelerate regulatory, like all the regulators are doing. So it is in full swing, and hopefully towards the end of January we'll be able to declare the results.
Can you tell us how much Johnson & Johnson has invested in research and development of the vaccine?
Well, we are still in the middle of that, but we in our R&D we have been co-investing with the U.S. government, and that's public. U.S. government has invested $1 billion in our program, and we jointly do a 50-50 approach there. We do half, the government does half, so you can calculate. We are in the middle of that. In manufacturing, we'll build it up ourselves globally. We have now 3 manufacturing plants for vaccines. We have 6 fill and finish plants in the world, which has been an Herculean task to get done in that time frame. It was very important, and it's the same almost for all the vaccines. At the same time, it is new technology as well as a new vaccine, and so it's an enormous complicated work to make sure that while you do the upscaling and manufacturing, at the same time you do the quality work and you do the clinical research and development as well as the regulatory work. as I was saying, Dr. Bourla was saying, no corners are cut here. It's like a huge amount of work compacted in a shorter term with extreme supervision from the regulators, very transparent, but also very fast. Regulatory answers come within 24 hours these days for the vaccines, and that has cut a lot of time out of the programs. The collaboration with the clinical centers in the world, we have 200 clinical trial centers doing vaccinating recruitment also there. Thank you to the clinicians who are doing that and all the staff, but also to all the participants. It's a massive undertaking. But again, you recruit, at a certain point, we were recruiting 1,500 to 2,000 people a day in our study. So on that scale, people just show up to participate. What we also have to be sure of is diversity in our trials, because the high-risk population is the elderly, is certain people with comorbidity, at certain ethnic groups in certain parts of the world. So besides targeting numbers, we also have to make sure that we show the efficacy and safety in each part of the population who are at most risk and first will need the vaccine to protect themselves and their loved ones.
Thank you very much for updating us on what Johnson & Johnson are doing. And I am going to take some journalist questions in about 12 minutes. There's a lot of questions coming in. But if I dig a little bit deeper, Albert, about this question of how much you are investing compared to, and where the money is coming from, the breakdown between the companies and the public sector. Albert, if you could give us some ideas on that for Pfizer.
As Paul said, we are in the middle of multiple things, so it's not clear yet. But our estimate is that in COVID programs, predominantly, the vast majority will be through the vaccine. We'll invest around $2 billion. And we are not, we are doing that alone.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that figure. And I'm just wondering, as Thomas said, there will be a few bumps in the road. It's a massive operation to distribute and manufacture these vaccines. What keeps you up at night, Albert?
Yeah, I sleep well at night, though there are serious concerns in my mind, and they evolve. In the beginning, the fundamental concern is, are we going to have a safe and effective vaccine? As we were starting accumulating data, the safety profile was emerging as an excellent, as a very good one. So the whole concern was, is it going to work? Then when we got the results that they were stellar, the whole concern went into, are we finalizing our manufacturing processes the way that we are expecting so that we can have enough supply? And then again, right now, we are very confident to deliver what we said we will deliver, 50 million doses this year, 1.3 billion next year, and we are working actually to see how we can increase it. Distribution, again, it was in our case, because of the cold chain, I was thinking that we need to find ways to simplify for the end user. And again, I'm very happy. We already worked very well in the UK, and it worked extremely well in our clinical trials. So I have no concerns on that. So right now, my concern it is what will happen with the world that will have, I hope, more than one, more than two. We know that we have more than two vaccines, but they will be supplying less than what the world needs, and this is an extremely valuable for every society medication, and how different countries will respond to the fact that we have 1.3 billion and there are 7 billion people, and how that will play out. I think it will be a testament to the global respects and to the global international relations.
Yes, indeed. And as we know, we're all going to need more than one vaccine. Paul, you've updated us on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Now you're going to make that available not for profit basis. Could you explain what that actually entails and means?
Well, that means that we will not make profit on it, and that was a choice from the beginning because collaboration for us was very critical here with many multiple partners. We did a lot of co-funding, and therefore that was the best way forward to get fast to making sure we got this done. That means for the Western world, it's not for profit, but also for when we go look at Gavi, even that might be too much, and we are looking for different types of ways to make that available. And as you know, we have made a commitment to reserve 500 million vaccines, and with a single dose, that means 500 million people vaccinated, if that works out in the clinical studies, to Gavi, of which will deliver a significant part this year and part next year. Also important for that is that the transportation conditions, we have a stability at 2 to 8 Celsius for 3 months. You can keep it for long term at -20. So we are working at this moment with the same platform in Congo and in Rwanda for Ebola. And that has learned us on how to manage this type of vaccines in that environment and get access quite rapidly to a large scale. So hopefully with that approach, with an affordable vaccine as well as a stable and transportable vaccine, will be able to make a big difference in the world.
Yeah. Affordable and also obviously accessible and equitable access, as you mentioned, is important for you too.
Something on that. Equitable access is very important as the way to it started in the UK and also in the US. It will be first distributed to the highest risk people. In most of the countries, that is the healthcare workers combined with the elderly. And we adhere to that too on a global distribution mechanism, is that we'll distribute around the world first, filling the responsibilities on access to those people who are most at risk. And that are the discussions we have with most countries on the priorities.
Severin, just to come back to that question of funding, how do you see the question of public funding?
Yeah, I would say in an exceptional situation like COVID-19, that can help. And I also commend companies like Johnson & Johnson who make their vaccines available for no profit. But I should also say, in the long term, this is not a sustainable model for innovation. There's an enormous success story about how the private industry has driven innovation with new novel medicines and other innovations. But for that, you need prices, a reimbursement, which then actually reflects the value of such innovations. Otherwise, nobody in the long term will have the means or will take the risk to develop such new novel medicines. Therefore, I think it's a good model in a crisis like this, but I don't think it can be a standard for sustainable innovation in the long term. Take, for example, antimicrobial resistance. Prices in this field are by far too low. And as a result of it, what has happened is that the vast majority of the industry has left this field. Nobody has invested in antibiotics anymore. And as a result of it, we have now increasing problems around the world. There are only a few companies, amongst them Roche, by the way, who keep investing in that. But many players have said goodbye to this area. And the reason was that the value of such antibiotics is not reflected in the prices, and the private industry is not able to make a sustainable business model. So I think it's very important that innovation is also rewarded in the long term in a sustainable way.
Yes, indeed. Antimicrobial resistance, some people are calling it the silent pandemic. But if we keep to the COVID-19 pandemic, very briefly, Severin, what are your concerns going forward?
It's in the short term, it's all about supply. All the speakers today have referred to that, and it's certainly also true for us as a company. We still have huge demand for COVID-19 testing. We're still ramping up to meet the demand. And the same is true for medicines. I mentioned the antibody cocktails. Supply will be the key issue here, will be the key constraint. So that's what we are really focusing at the moment. How can we ramp up supply as soon as possible?
Dave, let me just bring you in before I go to the journalists for their questions. Do you think the industry could have done anything more than it's done? And what do you think its focus should be going into next year?
Well, I think personally, I'm incredibly proud of the industry, and especially of the scientists who work in my company, who mobilized so rapidly within weeks of learning about a disease we didn't know about. And successfully, I think if you look across the companies we have here, the 20 or so large pharma companies that are members of IFPMA, we have produced so far all of the solutions that are improving testing, treating the disease, and as of today, I guess, inoculating patients to prevent the disease. So I'm incredibly proud of that. Now, there'll be time, I think, to look back and say what could be done even better. I think Severin raised an interesting point on microbial resistance, because there's some parallels here to antivirals as well. How warm can our efforts be so that we can move a little faster next time? In some cases, there are ongoing partnerships with government to get a fast start. In some cases, there weren't. I think supply chain investments that allow us to be more responsive in a pandemic situation would also be another area to revisit, of course. But in the short term, as we look at 21, to get to that question, I mean, this is an execution year for this industry. We have production coming online, growing every day on all of these solutions, testing drugs and vaccines. But we can't afford too many errors, and errors sometimes happen when you're moving fast and at scale. So this is really a time for this industry to execute and get these solutions to as many people as possible, as soon as possible.
Yes, indeed. I'm sure there will be lessons learned to what could be avoided and to be better prepared for the next pandemic. Let me now then open the floor to the many, many questions that have come in from the journalists following this briefing. So the first one, Paul, is from AFP. How effective are the vaccines in specific groups, such as pregnant women, older populations with chronic diseases, and immunosuppressed people? What can we expect vaccines for children? And the third one here, when do you believe that the vaccination has to be repeated? Every 1, 2, or 3 years? Well, perhaps you don't know all the answers to those, but Paul, for the Associated Press, if you could give it a good stab, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, that many of the topics still need research, and as typically with vaccines is the case, you start with once you have included into your study, and that is the population, like I described it, the diverse population. Then pregnancy is always a difficult question. We, with our platform, have with Bourla done and are doing the studies in pregnancy, so we probably will be able to, at a certain point soon, declare that we will study that. We have done studies up to children up to 1 year, so we know the tolerability, we know the immune. And so far, there has been not that much difference in the way people have responded, whether the elderly, adults, or children. We have seen a similar response in the populations. It is true that with COVID-19, you see a higher reactogenicity initially with the vaccines than what we have observed with others. It looks like almost with all the vaccines. And that might, but that's over within 24 hours in most of the patients. So I think we can talk about a very well tolerated vaccine, but we have to study the other populations in order to give the good recommendation. The big question is when to repeat, and that will be part of ongoing studies where we'll have to test whether boost at 6 months, boost at 12 months. We know something from the natural history of the disease where you see that antibodies are waning and that some people, not that many, get reinfected. So more has to be learned about that. And so we'll learn that as we go through the year, but it's definitely a very important subject of research and development now to learn the details of when to boost and other populations safe and effective.
Albert, it would be good to get your view on this question of boosting, but there are some other questions that are coming in from also a lot of different journalists from across the world, Australia, Greece, there's The Guardian in the UK. So Albert, there's a number of questions here. You might want to take a pen and paper. What does Pfizer expect, when does Pfizer expect to have data on the vaccine's ability to thwart transmission, as well as data on durability of its effect? What are the side effects one would expect to see? Would it be safe for people to receive more than one vaccine? And if not, why not? And are there any risks of doubling up on the various vaccines? So a number of questions there, Albert.
I will try, but maybe you remind me the questions because I didn't have a pen and a paper. In terms of the duration of the immune response and how durable the protection is something that we need to find out as with time. So we are going to follow up our subjects in our studies for 2 years, and we'll find out if there is a need for a booster or if the product is more durable than that. But the good news is that with this RNA technology that we are using, you can very easily boost with 1 dose more, and you don't have issues with that at all. So if there is a need, you just need to do another vaccine after a year or 2, but that's all. The second question was, why don't you start telling me one after the other?
Yes, would it be safe for people to receive more than one vaccine? And if not, why not?
It hasn't been tested. I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it is not, but it has not been tested. So I don't think authorities will recommend or will allow it.
And when do you expect to have data to know whether the vaccine doesn't just protect the person, but can also stop transmission?
Yeah, I believe that somewhere in the first quarter we may have this type of data. If also you can sterilize, let's say, the individuals, or if you just protect them from getting the disease, but still they can carry the virus.
And of course, I think you most probably answered it, but I'm just going to put it just in case. Are there any risks of doubling up on the various vaccines? I assume it's too soon to know, but Albert, you're the expert.
You're asking if there are risks if we
double up on the various vaccines. So
double up means what? To take one?
Well, what I would imagine that means, but perhaps the journalist who put that one in can clarify, is if people take one vaccine at the beginning and then perhaps the booster is from another vaccine. But we could ask for some clarification on that question.
This is what I answered originally in my question, but this is something that has not been tested so far. So I don't think that any authorities will allow it or recommend it right now.
No. And
somebody would like to come in?
Yeah, answering on doubling up, if it is doubling the dose, that doesn't help. Yeah, you at a certain point you have your immune response and you have your boosted your immune response. Having additional vaccines doesn't get you better protected. So, and the safety is not known for that. So it's absolutely not recommended to double up vaccine dosages.
Thank you for that clarification. Let me bring in Severin. There's some questions from the Swiss media here on your perspective on mass testing. In what situations does it make sense and how can it be done well? And how is Roche working to support mass testing in countries? Severin.
Right. So for the time being, actually, demand for tests still is higher than the supply the industry can provide for. So therefore, it's very important that testing is prioritized. And first of all, we have to take care of symptomatic patients, of people at risk, healthcare workers, and only if the volumes allow for broader testing, we should actually go into this direction. So there has been a lot of discussion, for example, should there be mass testing available for the traveling industry? If you take an airplane, for example, or if there's a big event that everybody is tested before going to this event, I can see in the midterm an opportunity to open up the economy by testing much more broadly. But for the time being, the quantities are just simply not available for that.
Thank you. There are some questions here. Dave, let me ask you about treatments and then perhaps Paul on vaccinations. This comes from ARD television in Germany and also Politico. So first of all, Dave, on treatments. NGOs are worried that poorer states will have to wait a long time to get the vaccine. NGOs ask enterprises to share their technology and waive their patent rights. Given the huge public investment in many vaccines developed against the virus, why are your companies not willing to share IP and do technology transfers so that vaccines and treatments can be produced anywhere possible to respond to the needs? So the question about not willing to share IP and do technology transfers, Dave, perhaps on treatments, and then Paul on vaccines.
Well, I would take issue with the nature of the question. I think the questioner is asking whether IP is a barrier to less developed countries accessing, in our case, therapies. The answer is no. We don't even enforce our IP in low and middle income countries. What is a barrier is the production capacities. So if it was thought that making IP more broadly available in these markets could help expand production, we would do it. In the case of Lilly, we have two different therapies, the anti-inflammatory and the antibodies. The anti-inflammatory is widely available everywhere, so there's no gap. And in fact, we're either donating or making product available close to cost in many, many cases there. With the antibodies, the reality is there is no manufacturing capacities available in these low-income markets. So if we donated the IP, there's no way to make the product. It's a circular argument. So what we need to do is harness the developing world or the developed world's capacities and distribute into the developing world. In our case, we've taken an approach there to say we will price according to gross national income per population and have three tiers of pricing: developed, middle income, and then the lowest. And in the case of the lowest, it will be either marginal costs or free. That's the method that we're using. But all of the capacities for monoclonal antibodies are essentially in wealthy countries. It would make no sense to enable someone to try to make something they have no ability to make. So this is a false narrative that IP is in the way here.
Okay. Paul, do you agree that IP is in the way, is a false narrative, and that your companies are not willing to share IP and do technology transfers in the case of vaccines?
Well, in the case of vaccines at this moment in time, it is we as companies, we are developing a new technology, new production technology, and scaling up all at the same time. It's not a stable technology. It is, for us at the moment, we are making it a stable technology to be able to produce. And we even don't have enough people, or we have to find the people to do our own tech transfers to our other manufacturing facilities. We have a massive mobilization of people around that. And that's the issue at this moment. Building a new manufacturing plant with new specifications will take 3 to 5 years. Mostly it takes 5 years for having this new facilities. So at the moment, it's absolutely not IP nor tech transfer. We are in the middle of innovating new technology to get this solved, which didn't exist before. And therefore, maybe that's time for that in the next 5 to 10 years. But at this moment, we focus on getting the technology stable ourselves and making sure we can supply next year before starting transferring technology and capabilities to others, which is an immense work. Manufacturing building will take 3 to 5 years, and before that, hopefully the pandemic is over.
Albert, you would like to come in on this too?
First of all, I agree fully with Paul and Dave, but also I wanted to build on what Dave just said before. I think if, as I said in the beginning, if there is a lesson here, it is that the IP, which is the blood of the private sector, is what brought a solution to this pandemic, and not and it is not a barrier right now. I think without that we wouldn't have a vibrant industry in diagnostics, because it is not, diagnostics didn't appear just that with goodwill. It was because Roche and Abbott and other companies, Quest, were able to do it. Therapeutics didn't appear like that. It was because investments from people that are called investors and shareholders in the hands of an enterprise like Lilly or Regeneron or Gilead were able to provide solutions. And the same applies, that this is the same, we are existing as a private sector, which is based on IP as Pfizer, and the same is J&J, and the same as Moderna. And this is why we're able to provide the solution. So I think, if anything, this pandemic taught us a lesson that reconfirmed the value proposition that the private sector brings to society, rather than the opposite.
Yeah, and this technology was also not invented yesterday. It was already invested over in these technologies for 10 years before they are deployed today in different parts of oncology, or different. And it has been a long term, which in the making. Now we build on it, and the first big yield of is happening at the moment of that technology. So it's not 12 months ago that we started to work on this. It's like 10 years ago, investments come now to fruition.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your remarks on that question. Now let me move, Albert, there's another question. This is from Agence France-Presse, also Quartz, coming back to pricing. What factors have gone into the final price of your vaccine candidate?
So the fundamental that went into the pricing was that we need to make sure that we make it very quickly available to everyone. So the principles are very similar with what Dave said. So we are having a tier pricing. It is one price for the developed world based on their GDP. Then we have another price lower for the middle income countries, and then in the low income countries like in Africa, etc., we are giving it on a non-for-profit base. Now, even the price on the developed countries that they can afford to pay, as one can imagine, these products right now are invaluable, particularly in conditions that the supply is lower than demand. We never took advantage of that. So to price right now, only in the US our pricing is known publicly, because with other countries they want confidentiality. And it is, let's say, less than $20, $19.50 in the US. It's like a meal. I think this is an average meal. So I think that we've proven that we are not taking the advantage of it. And by the way, with all governments, we were discussing that they should give it free to people. That's why we offered those low prices, so that to make sure that the citizens will take it for free, as it's happening in the US, for example.
Thank you very much for that. And indeed, Paul, perhaps, are you negotiating lower prices, Paul, for the vaccine for COVAX? And if you'd like to unmute yourself.
At the moment, COVAX is a combination of high, middle, and low income countries, and therefore there are different. There's a different approach to the different tiers in that, as my colleagues have been saying. Mm-hmm.
Thank you on that one. Let me then move to South Africa. A question again for you, Paul. Johnson & Johnson recently announced a deal to produce its vaccine in South Africa with Aspen Pharmaceuticals. Will Aspen be fill and finishing the vaccine in South Africa, or will there be any primary or secondary manufacturing in South Africa?
Well, the Aspen has fill and finish, and we have a collaboration on the fill and finish. As I was saying earlier, anything else earlier on producing vaccine substance itself will take 3 to 5 years. So we had to access, and everyone had to access, existing facilities to be able to deliver next year. And that's what we do. We contract fill and finish in several facilities all over the world.
So there's a few fill and finish questions coming in here, not just for vaccines, but also for diagnostics as well. Severin, yeah, what are your plans for, apologies, that's my mistake for misreading a question that's come in, but Severin, I'm still going to ask you. This is one from Politico, and then perhaps Dave. For those companies developing monoclonal antibodies for COVID-19, can you please tell us your plans for filing and launching markets outside of the US? So Severin and then Dave, getting regulatory approval outside the US.
Right. So I can speak for the antibody cocktail, which originates from Regeneron and where we have a worldwide agreement to produce and commercialize this cocktail. So it has been approved under the emergency status in the United States. And we are working together with authorities in the rest of the world to make the medicine available as soon as possible. However, I should say the key constraint at this stage is manufacturing capacities. It was pointed out already several times. For monoclonal antibodies, worldwide capacities are very limited. So to put it into perspective, for our antibody cocktail, we aim for a production next year of 2 million doses. 2 million doses. So this is a relatively small quantity of doses we can provide. Now, if we get those doses to the right patients, to the high-risk patients, they could play a major role in reducing mortality. But you can immediately see from the number, 2 million for the world, right? That supply is the number one issue here, and that's what we are focusing at the moment.
Thank you. Dave, the same question to you.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just so the reporters have it, we have submitted for review to a number of ex-US countries. The Canadians have accepted it, so it's approved under contingent use for Canada. We're in conversations with dozens of other countries, both developed and developing, for both the mono and combo therapy. But I agree with Severin's comment that we're talking about single-digit millions of doses next year in any case. And the key will be to collaborate with health authorities to allocate the supply within country to those most needy. And our data identifies people over 65 and those with pre-existing health conditions, immune suppression, et cetera, that can really benefit. And, we've shipped 250,000 doses in the US, and thousands of people have been treated. Anecdotally, it's very successful. So I think this is a key tool, but it's not by itself going to fix the pandemic crisis. Of course, we need as many people vaccinated as possible, and we need other types of therapies as well.
Well, there are lots of journalist questions coming in, so let me take a few more here. Severin, this is an interesting one from the Daily Mail in the UK. When do you anticipate large UK companies will begin COVID testing their staff regularly?
This refers to a question we covered earlier in terms of mass testing. And again, the limitations here are supply. There is, however, the prospect that supply will really significantly increase over the coming months, and that's related to antigen tests. So you have on the one hand so-called PCR tests. That's very difficult to ramp up, but rapid antigen tests and antigen tests also in a more centralized setting can be produced at much larger scale. And I think that will open up the door for a broader coverage of the population. And then, of course, in particular in critical sectors, the healthcare sector, that can also open up for more regular testing for these people concerned.
Thank you. Albert, there's a question from Reuters here. The FDA today released documents that raised no new issues about the safety and efficacy of your vaccine candidate. Given this outcome, do you have a new projected date for US approval? Could we see it this week, says Reuters?
This is not for me neither to decide nor to predict. I think that I expect a very intense meeting with the advisory committee. These are experts. They will ask a lot of questions. We have answers, we believe, to every question that they will ask. And I think they will vote yes, given the strength of the data. And then it's up to FDA to conclude the process and give us the license. They need to take as much time as they need to feel comfortable.
Yes,
this is very important for the trust of the vaccine from the people.
Yeah, in the hands of the regulators there. Paul, there's a question here from a Swedish journalist. The UK is planning human challenge trials in January. Will your company participate in such trials?
We are currently not planned to do that. And I think we are waiting for the validation of a challenge model and an acceptance ethically that will be needed. I think it might be very useful in the future, but at the moment, the challenge model has always been the challenge that if people get infected, do they get sick? And if it is a risk for the volunteers, and therefore proving that there is good therapy, as well as the challenge model validated, and then we'll maybe participate if still needed. We are doing a phase 3 study, so we'll prove at the moment in the real world the efficacy.
Yeah, certainly. Thomas, a question from Politico. On the proposal from South Africa and India on waiving aspects of TRIPS to ensure access to coronavirus medical products, is it not reasonable for countries to want to do everything possible to ensure that they have access to a vaccine, especially given the expected reduced in comparison to the massive needs? Now, I'm not sure whether that's a typo there on that question, so apologies, Politico US, but the main question is your view on South Africa and India on waiving aspects of TRIPS to ensure access to coronavirus medical products.
I think I got the gist of the question, and basically, as we already heard, IP, the current strong innovation business model, has been an enabler. We would have had no chance to move as quickly developing treatments or vaccines without the IP system we have. I fully understand, and I think that's legitimate, that people want to have access to the treatments or the vaccines. And we understand that the main constraint is supply. And that's why it is truly important. And I think it was very heartening to hear from all the 4 panelists how they are concerned that their treatments and vaccines or even tests reach the people who most need them, the healthcare workers, the vulnerable. That's why we are involved in the COVAX facility. But when you look at the political discussion in WTO on TRIPS, even if the patents were waived, not a single more vaccine would reach the people during the pandemic. Therefore, the practical impact, and we heard it from Paul in terms of the fill and finish collaboration with Aspen. We heard it from Dave and Severin in terms of the monoclonal antibodies. And you look at the complexity of the mRNA technology, not a single more vaccine would be available, but it would send a really bad signal for the future, because we already mentioned the importance of preparedness for future pandemics. And if the signal is, you know, if we have a new pandemic, we'll take away your patents, which have enabled us to react so strongly, I do not think that this would be the right signal.
There's also a question, Albert. This is from ITN News. This is the UK independent news channel. Why has the FDA discovered this and the MHRA missed it? Now, I'm not sure what they're talking to me about. Is that a sign of the UK regulator rushed approval? And how much does this potentially change distribution? I don't know whether that question means anything to you. I'm sorry. I'm going to try and see whether I can get some clarification on that, that question. And in the meantime, Albert, what I'm going to go to is this one, which comes from Australia and India. Pfizer and BioNTech's vaccine needs to be stored at around -70 degrees C. Is the logistics of maintaining this temperature through supply chains a significant hurdle to overcome before a widespread rollout of the vaccine can be implemented? And are you working on versions of your vaccine that can be stored in less extreme temperatures in countries like India, for example?
Clearly, to have something that requires -70, which is not something usual, it is an additional challenge. But in any case, I want to say that the distribution of a vaccine so massively in so many countries by itself, it is a challenge. I feel very comfortable about our ability to distribute the product at -70 right now. This is based on all the ingenuity of our mechanics that developed solutions to do that. We have special boxes that you store the vaccine there without needing refrigeration. You can transport it in a normal car, for example, and we have GPS and thermometers inside those boxes. So at any point of time, we know where each box is and what was the temperature over there. And right now we started already in the UK and things are going very well. And we did tests in the US and we will start soon, I hope. And I think everybody will see pretty soon that this is not a challenge, at least in countries that there is basic infrastructure, like a road, for example, or a place to store things. The answer to the second question is yes. We are working also on a new formulation that will be able to avoid the -70 and can be stored in simple refrigeration.
Thank you very much for that. Paul, a question from Switzerland here. Why are vaccine contracts with governments confidential and when will they become public in Europe?
Why they're confidential? I have no clear answer for that. It's the choice of the two parties to keep contracts confidential, as many discussions are ongoing in the world, and significant specificity on delivery, etc., could bring a lot of noise through the world, and that's not needed in this complicated times where we have already to deal with so much. That is.
Thank you very much. I've now got clarification on that question from ITN News, Albert, which is, has the UK regulator rushed approval? And does where the vaccine is approved potentially change distribution? And should the UK change its protocol to 1 dose now? But yes, the main question is about the speed of that approval by the MHRA, the UK regulators.
Although it's not appropriate for me to comment on regulators, but I would say that the MHRA is a world-renowned agency, that it is one of the best in the world and one that has the best expertise in the world. FDA is the same. But so that's where I will stop. I have full confidence, and I think the British people have full confidence. And by the way, I think many other countries, they have full confidence on the abilities of the UK regulator.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, there's a question here from Bloomberg, because of course, as you say, you're carrying on your trials. Have you seen volunteers drop out in light of the Pfizer news, i.e. the Pfizer vaccine, as we know, is being given as we speak, at least in the UK. But with your vaccine, have you lost volunteers, and what issues do you see with recruiting a range of ages if lots of older people get vaccinated over the next few months?
Well, that's a question we are working on to answer for the people in the studies, that if they get access to a certain vaccine in a certain region in their category, for whether they're elderly or healthcare worker, we find a way to inform them and do everything necessary that they can participate in that study or in that rollout. But it's very important that people who are in clinical studies consult with their study center before they drop out, because it might not be needed to drop out for getting access to a vaccine. And so that's where people have to get the guidance. And I would recommend stay in the study. When you are in a study and if you get access to another vaccine, first consult with the study center to make sure that we continue to learn, but at the same time, you're not at disadvantage to get access to a vaccine if you are in a placebo.
Yeah. Paul, this is obviously with your hat on as Chief Scientific Officer. In Russia and Italy, some of the journalists are asking you, there's been an article in Nature, and according to Nature, there is a new mutation of COVID-19 in Denmark and the Netherlands, which might be immune to the new vaccine. Do you think that current vaccines will still be efficient, or do we need herd immunity now?
I don't have an answer on the specific mutation people talk about, but as scientists, the first mutations which appeared in the course of the year were tested, and the vaccines were still active on that. We need more specifics to yes or no answer on that question of the scientists now. I have no detailed information.
A question here from the Business Insider, Albert. Does the data suggest a level of protection from Pfizer's vaccine after getting just one dose? If true, what are the implications of that? And when could Pfizer have confirmatory data about the potential effects or benefit from a single dose?
Yes, the truth is that what we saw, it is already from the 12th day, which is just 12 days after the first, we already start having protection. But clearly the protection is not full. So this 2-dose vaccine, so people need to take 2 doses to be able to feel confident that they're protected at 95%. They have 95% chances of being protected. At dose 1, it's around 50%, something like that.
And there's another question here, Albert.
However, I want to say that that's important, though, from epidemiology point of view, because when you start already having, with the first dose, your population already start having some type of immunity, that helps. But again, I say it's a very big mistake if anyone tries to do it with only one dose. With 2, you almost double the protection.
Okay. There we are. Yes, a question from the Swiss media, Albert. How challenging has it been to ramp up the Pfizer vaccine production? Have you suffered any ingredient shortages, and how about equipment shortages?
Yeah. When you are embarking in such a monumental project, every day we had a zillion of challenges, believe me. And every day we had successes that unfortunately couldn't last more than 1 hour on the average, because then some bad news would come to spoil the satisfaction and the joy. This is extremely difficult to do what we are doing right now. So there were shortages in some materials, there were shortages in some equipment, and we have resolved it all. So that's why we started the manufacturing process, and that's why we already have produced millions, and we will produce 50 by the end of the month, and then 1.3 by the end of the year. And now, if there was available more machinery, more technology, more raw materials, we wouldn't make 1.3 billion next year. We would make 2, 3, because we can make 4 and still sell it all or distribute it all. But right now we are exhausting the capacity of us and of our suppliers after looking all over the world to see if someone knows what we are doing. And unfortunately, it's not that simple.
And perhaps one final question for Severin, has MABS manufacturing issues been a reason for not filing outside of the US? Is there enough supply for markets beyond the US, Severin?
May I just ask, to what is the question related to?
Because that's a very good question. This is the challenge, of course, when you're taking questions writing, but they're wanting to know, I think, is there enough supply outside the US of diagnostics? And I'm just getting a note here that this is also a question for Dave. So
this is with the monoclonal antibodies, Severin, I think.
Right. Okay. Yeah, we have manufacturing capacities in the US, but also important manufacturing capacities outside of the US. And, we are leveraging any capacity we can find within our own network and also with partners to maximize output. I can just reiterate what Albert and others, Dave, etc., have already said. We are leveraging anything we can get within our own network and outside of our own network, and this is in the US and in a number of other countries. As far as our antibody cocktail is concerned, the distribution in the US is taking care of Regeneron, and we take care of the distribution outside of the US.
And Dave,
it's clear we've submitted in a number of countries, not limited by this question. We think the appropriate thing is to make it available as broadly as we can, and then let governments allocate within country to the highest risk individuals. That's the best way to manage the limited capacities. But like Severin had said, we have 5 different API facilities, 5 different fill finish facilities on every continent working on this. The reality is there's not enough monoclonal antibody production on the planet to serve the needs of COVID-19 with these therapies. We're using what was already built for other things and repurposing it here. Delivery time for a new facility for antibodies is 3 or 4 years typically. So we don't have the choice to build a new site for this purpose. We're just using what we have. And I think doing a pretty good job stitching that together, given all the constraints.
Well, thank you, the media, for your many, many questions that have come flooding in, and gentlemen, for giving us an update on what you're doing and what you are planning to do next year, which is obviously going to be a very important year. Let me hand over now to Thomas Cueni for his closing remarks to this media briefing.
Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you for all of you who tuned in. When you look back to March, when we started these media briefings first time, I think at that time we all felt a daunting responsibility upon us. We believed in the power of science, and I think Albert said it at the beginning, really what we have seen here, science will win. We have seen tremendous progress in terms of treatments, in terms of vaccines. I think all of us have seen our best, highest expectations in terms of the efficacy of these early vaccines exceeded. I think we also see the importance and the power of partnership. We have heard from Paul, for example, but from all the others too. It has been amazing how regulators responded overnight very often. The rolling submissions which are ongoing, the only reason why one can really confidently say no corners have been cut, because the safety of patients overrules any other consideration, such as politics or speed. I think it's also really heartening to see, and Dave said it at the beginning, how proud he is about this industry. He has been IFPMA president for the last 2 years. I think it has really been a proud moment in terms of the industry delivering on what society would hope industry would do, not just in terms of the science, the treatments, the vaccines, but also doing so in a socially responsible manner. You have heard from all companies that they are deeply conscious about the need to provide their vaccines and treatments or tests in a socially responsible way, make them available and affordable, really try everything to scale up, apply differential pricing, or in some cases donations, or in some cases where it's possible, technology transfer. I think we have seen all of that in partnership with governments, with international organizations such as WHO, CEPI, Gavi, and others, philanthropic organizations, academics. It is amazing. I think at the end also, we really need to expect bumps ahead of the road. As Albert said, there's no day without a nasty surprise, which we will have to overcome. And it's really kudos to all the engineers, scientists, and everybody working in this, and great respect to the healthcare workers on the front line who do deserve to get those vaccines early on. I think it's also important to say that we have seen light at the end of the tunnel, but for the next few months, life will remain difficult in literally all our countries, and there's no way avoiding the social distancing rule, even now over the festive seasons. Really, we really need to respect the social distancing rule. We need to respect the hand washing. And we need to realize that mask wearing does protect not just us, but others. Otherwise, those next 3 to 6 months ahead will be even tougher. There have already been too many lives lost to COVID-19. I think we from the industry are in there to bring the pandemic to an end. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, Thomas, for your closing remarks. To the journalists for your very insightful questions. The recording of this briefing can be found on the IFPMA website at www.ifpma.org. In the meantime, please stay safe. Thank you for joining us.